Welcome to Q&A live from this beautiful Elizabeth Murdoch Hall in the Melbourne Recital Centre. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, football and media icon Eddie Maguire, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer, transport magnate Lindsay Fox, award-winning star of stage and screen Rachel Griffiths, and the shadow immigration minister Richard Marles. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. As usual, we're being simulcast on ABC News 24 and News Radio. You can join the Twitter conversation, or you can send us a question by using the Quanda hashtag that just appeared on your screen. Well, tonight we've been joined by an audience of almost 1,000 Melburnians. They've got plenty of questions. Let's go to our very first one. It's from Glenn Hoskins.
My question is for Rachel Griffiths. Depending on who you listen to, Julia Gillard is described as a consultative, witty and a strong leader, or an incompetent liar who you can't trust. You've had the chance to meet with her in your research before playing her. Which Julia will you be bringing to the real Julia? And can you answer in your best Julia Gillard voice?
No pressure, no pressure.
It's a serious challenge.
It's a serious challenge. No, my Julia voice will not be let out tonight. I'll have a press conference when I'm ready. And it's proving harder than North Yorkshire with a touch of Lancashire, Welsh and Northern Irish put together. It's probably the most challenging accent that I've ever had to work with. What Julia am I going to bring? Well, I think the first part of your question was more interesting, which is this, you know, these two extremely divisive ideas looking for a woman to inhabit. Why I'm interested in this project and why I think it's so relevant to all Australians is that we have, I think, a media that likes to dehumanise and kind of create these very polemic identities. And I'm sure actually everybody who's here tonight has been the victim of, you know, that Eddie or this Eddie or, you know, that Kelly. And we're actually all people. I, of course, will be looking to inhabit the human being. And
how do you go about doing that, particularly a very controversial one like this? And a real person who's obviously still alive when you do the performance.
I think I'll read everything I can. I will talk to everybody I can. Probably people she doesn't want me to talk to, people she does. I've spent some time with her. I think it's true what people say, that the closer you get, the more you like her, and the closer you get to News Limited, the less you like her. Did I just make that up? Maybe.
I think you just made cut and paste anyway.
Might have. Did she really say that? I think as you dive into playing a character, the idea is that you should lose all perspective. So you kind of go deeper and deeper into a person, and at that point are probably less able to argue any political position. I would try to put myself in her shoes. How is it to be a female entering the highest office of the land and being received the way she was? How is it to be a woman in politics? I'll talk to people like yourself about your first experience and your first day of Parliament and whether or not you felt that was a welcome place for women.
Kelly O'Dwyer, we could bring Kelly in right now and ask her that question. How welcoming is it?
Well,
not so welcoming in Cabinet, obviously.
Well...
Believe it or not, Tony, it's a little more welcoming than Q&A. Look, Parliament, you know, is a great privilege to be a representative, to represent your local community, and I think anybody who takes on that job, irrespective of what side of politics they're on, they do it because they feel a real sense of vocation, and I certainly did. I'm sure Julia Gillard did in going into Parliament as well. But in terms of, you know, how women are perceived, whether women are treated differently, you know, Julia Gillard did come in for quite a lot of criticism. Quite a lot was legitimate criticism, and some of it was not so legitimate. You know, some of the personality style breakdowns, I suppose I didn't particularly like, But then again, that's nothing unique to Julia Gillard. That's
Is there a morality tale in this for young modern women entering
Well, no.
politics?
The point I was about to make, Tony, is it's not just something, though, that's happened to Julia Gillard as Prime Minister. It's something that happened to John Howard as Prime Minister, where effigies of him were burnt in the street. We saw only last week the March for March, where people were wearing FU Tony Abbott T-shirts, and they were also, you know, burning sort of icons
Listen,
of Tony.
I'm going to pause you there
unfortunate.
only because we've got a question on that subject coming up. But just let me bring in Lindsay Fox here. And Lindsay, what do you think? Was it men of a certain age who decided they didn't really like having a woman as Prime Minister?
Well, I think we're all brought up on the basis that the man had to work and the woman had to stay home and look after the house and the children. I thought that when I started training my wife 55 years ago. I found out last month that wasn't the case.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Eddie, what do you think? Julia
Good morning,
Gillard.
Paul. Look, I think the horrible thing for Julia Gillard, and when you sit back and you're not involved in the cut and thrust of politics on a daily basis, the thing that is the most disheartening thing is that we've lost another really good person who should be in Parliament for a long time. She's far too young to have been gone. And at the same time, no person can maintain that amount of scrutiny and that amount of abuse and pressure, and also, you know, making mistakes along the way. So let's assume that we say, right, OK, she made some good decisions, made some bad decisions. But I think she was always up against it, Tony. It was compromise from the word go. From the moment she became the leader, from the moment she became the Prime Minister, from the moment she had to do the deals with people that she probably didn't really want to do deals with. And therefore, she was pushing an agenda that she probably didn't ever believe in. And there's nothing harder in life than actually trying to promulgate something you don't believe in. And I think that always just put her at a disadvantage that she was never able to recover from. And as I said, it's just disappointing that another great performer in Australian politics has left the scene far too early.
I'd like to, can I add one thing to that?
Certainly can.
That I think will be creating our extraordinary piece of riveting television in the shadow of, and that is the rise of Hillary Clinton, because I absolutely believe that she will be the next US president. And I think her being a post-menopausal woman, a woman that has now escaped the kind of scrutiny of the childbearing sexual creature of a woman in her prime, and she can just do the older woman withering stare to her critics. She's got her kind of smoky voice down now. She's smooth, she's not jarring. And there is an army of women. I can't tell you how surprised people are going to be, the women who are going to come out and organise for Hillary and elevate her to that office. And I think it's going to take us by surprise as we see that energy. And I believe those women are here. I think there's baby boomer women and women of older generations who are absolutely passionate about Julia, and they loved seeing a woman in our office. And I think we are a representative democracy and that our parliament should look like that.
Hear, hear.
Richard Marles, you clearly didn't enjoy her prime ministership as much as the other people on the panel.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think
being instrumental in bringing her down, I mean.
Well, I think Julia Gillard is an enormously significant figure in our history. I think in terms of the role that gender played within her prime ministership, Julia said it all on the night that she finished in the job. She said it didn't define everything, but it did explain a fair bit. And certainly watching Julia from reasonable proximity, that seemed to me to be the case. But I think from the point of view of the Labor Party now, and also really the country, the right thing to be doing now is to celebrate Julia Gillard, to celebrate her as one of the heroes of the Labor movement from a Labor perspective, but to celebrate her as a historic figure in this country, and to celebrate the wonderful things that she did for Australia.
Just very briefly, have you
is an
considered
example.
at all who might be playing you in this mini-series?
I'm pretty confident I won't be in the mini-series, and I certainly haven't been interviewed.
You undersell your role in
Not
tearing
true,
her
not true.
down.
Small role.
OK, let's move on. We've got another question. It's from Michael Cooper.
Social media has been providing an outlet for often bullying behaviour towards those in high office, with intense hatred and vitriol sometimes levelled towards them. Just as Julia Gillard did, Tony Abbott cops his fair share of some incredibly vile comments, which, as a teacher, would perhaps see some of my students expelled for that sort of behaviour. I guess my question, while social media bans touted in Turkey aren't the answer, should we be providing greater respect, affording greater respect to people in high office like the Prime Minister?
Lindsay Fox, what do you think?
Michael, I'm a great believer that we owe a great amount of support to anybody that has the high office of Prime Minister of Australia. Whether he is a Protestant, whether he is a Catholic, whether he is a Jew,
Or a she.
or whatever it might want to be, like my wife, she gets the last say. The real key, the United States have got it. The United States carry through the position of President or Mr. President for the whole period of the man's life. Now, nobody works harder than the person sitting in the top office of this country, regardless of which party he represents. And I think we all, as Australians, should stand up and salute anyone that has taken that period of time out of their life to try and lead this great nation that we're all part of.
Yeah.
Please. No. I was going to say, just remain seated as you salute, if you don't mind. Eddie.
Well, I agree with what Lindsay said there. I think one of the things that we have to be careful on social media is the flow-on effect to kids. I mean, it is harrowing what goes on out there for kids. You know, the Madeline and the Alana and Madeline Foundation is now doing great work, and John Bertrand is the chairman. They're doing great work to try and get into the community, but you see it on a daily basis with kids, and whether it's kids who have got issues at home, or whether they've got sexual issues or orientation issues, any type of thing. The picking. Once upon a time you could leave the schoolyard and maybe run home. Now it follows you home. You get up first thing in the morning, you see it. So, yes, it has to start at the top. The trickle-down effect and the example that is given from our politicians and from our media, people have to pull their heads in. It's gone a little bit too far, and it is having a seismic effect on people down the track. And it's all very well us saying, oh, we'll do anything for the kids, except actually change our ways. So we do have to be careful. It is a new experience for us all. It's unfettered broadcasting. You know, you don't turn up when you're 13 and get the job of hosting Q&A. But these days kids do.
More's the pity.
More's the pity. But that's the problem these days. Everybody's a broadcaster. There is a bit of coward's corner about it where you can just hide and have a crack at people. And the smarter or that you think you are, or the more virulent you are in your attack, the better kudos you seem to get, when in fact that's not the case. And it's interesting when you actually meet people who might have flayed you in the social media, and you meet them face to face, and they're completely different people, which is naturally the case with bullies. But yes, I agree with what Lindsay said.
You've had that experience?
Oh, I've had it plenty of times. Yeah, but I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't go on social media. I have it on my shows, on Triple M's Hot Breakfast, Tony, which you are wonderful.
You got it in.
Hello to Mick Malloy. Yeah, I don't engage in it because there's enough in the media for the people who are high profile. You cop it daily, basically, anyway. So you have to develop a thick skin, and you do. But it is for the smaller people. It's for the people who aren't used to this, who just are devastated by social media.
I think Eddie makes, though, a really good point, and I think it goes to the heart of your question, Michael, about people who tweet and attack people through social media who are anonymous. And I think that's probably the critical thing, that there are people who are prepared to do things because they think nobody knows who they are. Yeah. And, you know, that's something that I think perhaps we need to talk about, whether or not people need to have their actual identity on social media so we recognise who it is that they are.
I've got to say, just go to the question though, the people carrying around the banners, the anti-Abbott banners, the ditch the witch banners, to go back to the previous government, they carried them around quite openly.
Yeah.
Well,
and-
at least they were prepared to do that. You know,
Yeah.
I actually
Yeah.
say, you know, that's a braver person, that's a braver bully.
And I agree with that.
But there's no humour.
disgusting.
There's no humour in these things.
Well, no, it's
That's what's gone out the window. Once upon a time, if you had the mickey taken out of you, it was actually you laugh along with it. You might actually learn a lesson from it for, you know, pull your own head in and your own hubris. But these days, it's just vitriolic attack, which doesn't make any impact on the person who's being attacked because he's straight into defensive mode, as opposed to maybe reflecting, having a bit of a laugh, and realising, oh, hang on, maybe they've pulled my coat here.
But
So there's
can I
nothing
just
like
also
that.
say that placards of Ditch the Witch and placards against Tony Abbott are not stopping participation of fantastic people into Parliament. It's actually the bullying on the floor. So we can get distracted by social media, but the truth is we get thick skins against that stuff and we develop resilience, and we are teaching our kids resilience now. But if you go into our Westminster system, that is bullying live on television, and it absolutely relies on belittling and pulling people down, and a kind of private school legacy of Eton and Harrow yelling at each other across the floor. And it's not where any smart, successful woman I know really chooses to go and make a difference.
Okay. You want to get in? Briefly.
It is remarkable when you speak to constituents how often that point is made. And I think that we need to be aware in public life how the example that we set, and I certainly, you know, I don't feel comfortable with it. Quite often foreign dignitaries come to watch Question Time. You have to sort of let them know that this is not the high watermark of our democracy before they go in there. Often, and this is worse, you know, there's a class of school kids who are looking at it, and you know, what are they picking up from it? So I do think it is a valid point. I wanted to say in relation to social media, I think it does have the quality of amplifying the noisy few, perhaps unlike any other form. And I think that's part of the issue with it as well.
Okay, let's move on. This is a Q&A. It's live from Melbourne. Our next question is from Arthur Farn.
Thank you, Tony. My question is for Kelly O'Dwyer. The PM loudly protests the honesty and integrity of Arthur Sinodinos. Can you explain how a Chief of Staff to the former PM and a man of his experience and standing can become involved in a company partly owned by the Obeid family, reportedly stood to profit to the tune of some $20 million from a business venture at the expense of the public purse?
Well, Arthur, it's a question that has dominated, I think, the headlines. And let me say this, the Prime Minister said, and I would say this of Arthur Sinodinos, he's somebody who has had a very long and distinguished career in public service, both as a Chief of Staff to a Prime Minister and also as now a representative in the Senate. The questions that you're asking regarding his association with Australian Water Holdings, they're questions that are going to be put to him at the ICAC hearing. And I think it's really critical before the lynch mob, you know, descends on all of this to say he hasn't actually been accused of doing anything. There is no allegation that has been put about Arthur Sinodinos, and he is going to ICAC as a witness, as have other Labor members of Parliament and former Labor members of Parliament, like Doug Cameron, like Greg Combet. So before the lynch mob descends, I think let's just take a breath and note that all of these questions will be answered in ICAC as appropriate. And more to the point, let's also recognise, you know, the fact that, you know, one of the key issues here is that people are saying he's associated with Eddie Obeid. Well, who's Eddie Obeid? He is a former minister, Labor minister, who had a huge amount of power in the previous New South Wales Labor government, and he's been found to have acted corruptly. But the reason the Labor Party have jumped all over this is as well because they've got a pretty sad history when it comes to
Kelly, can I just interrupt you there because since you've raised the issue.
Yeah.
It has to be said that Eddie Obeid's son was working in this very small operation, in fact took Senator Sinodinos, as he now is, to a number of meetings with investors. Now, I suppose the question people are asking is why wasn't he, as chairman of that company, asking serious questions?
He's made a statement in the Parliament and he's going to give evidence, as he's been asked to do, as a witness at ICAC. But the point I was about to make before, Tony, is that the reason the Labor Party jumped all over this is because the former president of the ALP, during Julia Gillard's time as Prime Minister, Mike Williamson, is in jail right now. He's in jail because he was found to have defrauded his former union, the HSU. We've got Craig Thompson, the former member for Dobell, Labor member, who is facing sentencing again for defrauding his union. So,
all right, let's hear from our other panellists. Eddie Maguire.
I think that a lot of these things all head back to one place, and that is the fact we don't pay our politicians enough. And
some people are greedy.
Well, it has to be said, he wasn't a politician then, and he was earning $200,000 for 100 hours' work.
Exactly, and probably doing so because he knew he was going to become a politician and get paid no money during the biggest period of time in his life where he'd make money. And it's very hard for politicians to sit across the table and make millions of dollars for businessmen and get paid a pittance along the way. And I'm being quite genuine about this. I think it's time, and this is the problem, the politicians...
They could sit across the table from you and make $1 million.
Well, they could if they could. They'd have to answer 15 questions, though, Tony.
And that wasn't
me, that was him.
Plugged too, given their experience.
Don't tell me you're plugging Hot Seat at 5:30 on Channel 9, Tony.
Let's hear from Lindsay Fox.
Times like this, it makes me feel good to be a humble, simple truck driver.
That's it, huh?
Why go for a second line after that one?
No, it's a winner. It's a winner.
But
All right, go ahead.
No, I think the reality of all of these things, it's very easy to judge a person well before the act. We are looking at a situation where Sinodinos, over a long period of time, has been a very good, genuine person for the interest of Australia. Now, what you read in the papers quite often doesn't tell the total story. It tells you what helps sell the newspaper, and at that same time castigates the individual, and the process of time will tell you whether it's right or wrong. One of the biggest problems we have in Australia is the tall poppy syndrome. And if there are no tall poppies, there are only weeds.
Yeah, Richard Marles, it's fair enough, isn't it? I mean, the point that the Prime Minister's made is he stepped aside. What more could he do?
Well, Arthur Sinodinos obviously has some serious questions to answer to the Independent Commission Against Corruption. That's plain. I think one of the things we now need to see is the Prime Minister answer questions in the Parliament about why we have got to a point where Arthur Sinodinos has had to step aside, and what the Prime Minister knew, particularly at the time that Mr Sinodinos was pre-selected, about this matter. Now, that is important. And the reason it's important is actually because of the comments that Kelly was making earlier. And that is that for the last few years, we have seen the coalition almost exclusively focusing on behaviour like this as their proposition to the Australian people about why they ought to be in government. And so
they could make a pretty strong case when it comes to the New South Wales Labor Party.
Having gone down that path, it is now important that they stick to the standards of probity which they have held themselves. And so it is important now that we don't have the spectacle which we have seen over the last couple of weeks of the Prime Minister refusing to answer a single question, not about Arthur Sinodinos, but about what he knew about it all. And it is important that he comes clean on that.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts on this at all?
Well, I can't really speak to the whole Sino affair, but having been a New South Wales resident, it's just these echoes of kind of a rum-core colonial free-for-all. And I live in a clean estate now, I have to say, and when I go back to Sydney and I open it's more corruption, I just and I do think people in New South Wales have had enough of it. And that's not this party or that party. It's just like enough pigs at the trough. And personally, I don't...
Let's just
just a Melbourne-Sydney thing.
It might be a Melbourne-Sydney thing, but I don't think the time that dirty politicians and their friends do in jail is enough of a deterrent. I don't think the pay thing, especially when looking at the older politicians' defined super benefits, is really a good argument. Maybe some of the younger politicians, maybe. But I think the deterrence has not really historically been there to also, it's so important, I think, to our new migrants. Now, 28% of our Australians now are new migrants. Many have come from more corrupt governments where their relationship with authority isn't as trusting. And I think I pride myself in how clean we are compared to the rest of the world. It's really a wonderful source of pride to me of how good our record is. And I think we should do everything we can to say that we are one of the cleanest countries in the world and tell our new immigrants that this is how it's done here. Because when they open the papers, they go, oh, it's just like home.
OK, let's move on to another subject. Our next question is from Jill Johnson.
My question is to Mr Miles. Watching the professionalism of Navy personnel on the ABC's 7:30 report last Monday, and the overt threats expressed against both the Navy and Australia by a failed applicant for Australian citizenship, do you not feel that the present government's stance is vindicated and worthy of the opposition's support, especially while there are genuine refugees waiting for a safe haven in camps around the world?
Tony, it's a good question. Let me start first of all by saying this in relation to the whole debate. This has been an appalling debate for this country really going back to 2001. I mean, we have had dog whistling at one end of the debate, we've had irrationality at the other. And frankly, we have to get to a point in this country where we move beyond that kind of debate and where we start talking about the wonderful contribution that immigration has made to our country. And I think if there is... And if there is anything, I want to achieve in the job I'm doing, it's to try and play a part in that. From a Labor point of view, I think it's also really important that we in Labor start articulating the values which have underpinned the very difficult decisions that we've made.
Yeah, but I'm going to bring you back to the questioner because she asks, essentially, isn't the turn back the boats policy working?
Well, can I say the values, and because it goes to this question, the values that underpin the way in which I approach this are first of all compassion and secondly generosity. Now, when you look at compassion, what has characterised events over the last few years is unquestionably the enormous loss of life at sea. So if what we are seeing is an end to the loss of life at sea, that is unequivocally a good thing. And
so you're actually saying now in front of this audience that turn back the boats if it saves lives is unequivocally a good thing?
Well, let me be clear about turning back the boats. I have two... No. Saving lives is unequivocally a good thing. There are two issues of concern that I have about turning back the boats. But the first point is this. There is so much secrecy in terms of the way in which this government is going about its asylum seeker policy. This country doesn't actually know what is going on the high seas, so it's hard to answer that
I'll bring you
question.
to the 7:30. Well, take a second. The 7:30 was mentioned, and of course, most of our audience sitting here won't have seen it, but there's been a re-investigation by them. This evening we've seen the results. The burnt hands allegations have resurfaced against Australian military personnel. They found new witnesses. How does this play into the argument?
Well, all of that is deeply concerning. I've got to say it doesn't add up to me. I don't believe it. But I think this is the issue. Because there is so much secrecy, which is surrounding the way in which the government is conducting its asylum seeker policy, that in that instance that you've described, we've got our Navy personnel and our customs officers essentially in a position where they are unable to defend themselves. And it is absolutely time now that we do get to be told exactly what's going on out there so that Navy personnel can defend themselves against the allegations that are being made. And I go back to the question...
Can I just ask you this? You've seen the program in question. You've seen that there are new witnesses making the allegations again, supporting each other in this case, suggesting that this did happen. Are you saying it should not be investigated because you don't believe it?
Oh, no, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that
you
it
did
is...
say you don't believe it.
I don't. But I can't know, and none of us can know, so long as there is a situation of secrecy around these events. And so my point is simply this: it is time for the government to allow the Navy and Customs and the public servants who are involved in this to defend themselves against these allegations, and that necessarily means that they be allowed to speak publicly so the Australian people can know what's going on. That's what I'm saying about it.
OK, let's hear from Kelly O'Dwyer.
The first, it's a good question, Jill. The first question, the first point I think that I would make is that Richard didn't actually answer your question. He alluded to it, but couldn't quite bring himself to say that Operation Sovereign Borders is actually working. In 95 days, we've not had one successful people smuggling operation. Not one. And yet, if you compare the same period last year, in that same period of time, we had over 55 boats and 3,116 people arrive. So it is working. I think it's fair to say it's working.
OK, can we go to the second point?
To your point,
other 7:30 program, which is on today, has re-raised the allegations of burnt hands. Now, the last time that happened, the ABC was roundly castigated. Will this happen again?
I think it probably will, because it's recycled allegations. They're recycled allegations. There's nothing new in the allegations.
Well, that's not strictly speaking true, is it? Because there are at least two new witnesses who say, in one case, this happened to me, in another case, I saw this happen, on top of the previous witnesses.
Well, people in circumstances as they are in often have real motivations to make those sorts of allegations. Anybody can make any allegation they like about anybody. The question is, what judgment do you apply to that? And we can see through, the fact that this has been already checked, because
can I ask a very simple question? It was a question raised by the program. Has it been checked in the sense that someone from the government, some Australian authority, has gone and spoken to the people making the allegations?
There is always a post-operation review, and to Richard's point before...
No, can I bring you to that particular question? Because the program said no person from the Australian officialdom has spoken to these people.
But if I was to make up an allegation about you that has no substance, would I have to necessarily interview you to know it is not correct, if there are other corroborating witnesses and other people that you have spoken to say that that allegation is without foundation?
So just to get to the bottom of this, the answer is no. No one has spoken to them from the Australian government or from the Australian military.
The answer is that there is... The answer is... Well, let me just respond to the point that you made. The Chief of Navy has come out incredibly strongly to condemn these allegations and to say they are untrue. So when you say that no one's heard anything, the Chief of Navy has come out and said this, Customs has said it, the Minister has said it. The Minister, I think, has said it on more than 4 separate occasions.
Well, sorry, but you're misrepresenting what he was suggesting, I think.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, what he was actually saying is no one knows whether any Australian official has spoken to these people, but of course these people say no Australian official has spoken to them.
And I can only say to you again that it is important for Operation Sovereign Borders to be successful. It is important that the information contained in Operation Sovereign Borders is only disclosed by Lieutenant General Angus Campbell at the appropriate time. Well, you might boo that, but it is actually being very successful. And
I think that's how the Australian public do feel about the secrecy closure.
I'm happy to say that there is a post-implementation review, as you would understand. Our Navy and Customs personnel work incredibly hard in difficult circumstances.
All right, but I think we've just gotten to the bottom of the key point here, which is no one has spoken to the people who've made the allegations. Eddie Maguire should someone speak to them from the Australian official domain?
Well, of course you do. You have to have the investigation into what's going on because it's become such a big public issue now. But I suppose you can do that. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, Tony. And I think the key thing now is, I think whether you hate the turn back the boat situation or not, it has now proved to be workable on 2 occasions. So if we say, OK, that's that. The next period, though, for Australians, and picking up on Rachel's point about people looking at Australia as a great country, is we now have to work out what we're going to do to resettle these people, to make them part of our community, to work through. Don't just dump them in hostels or in prisons or even in suburbs around Australia. We have to make sure we don't do the same thing we did in the 50s with the British and the Scottish and the Irish and then the Turks and all the rest of it coming through. You know, and it breaks my heart that over the back fence from where I grew up is the Broadmeadows Army Camp, and we used to send people off to Gallipoli from there in 1915 and 1914, and then it was the place where all the migrants came, and now it's a prison. This is in Broady, you know, this is 10 minutes from where we're sitting. And what we have to do is we have to start, and I don't know whether we do like a Transport Accident Commission type of ad to show exactly what Richard said early on about what the people who come to this country bring with them. We've been spooked by every politician on both sides for the last 8 years about how bad everybody is coming in. OK, and it's fair enough because we had Bali, we had September 11, we've had terrorism and all the rest of it. What we have to do now is take a deep breath and realise these people are humans, and they're humans in the worst of their despair, and we have to show that great Aussie tradition that happens when you see blokes like Lindsay Fox when there's a bushfire, stop everything, drop everything, and the whole community come together. And maybe if we started to quote my old mate Vince Sorrenti, the comedian, have a barbecue, work out what's going on, talk to these people, find out what we've got more in common than what we've got against us, and start to build the community that we deserve in this country that has made Australia.
I want to hear from the other panellists. So, Lindsay Fox, I mean, you would have seen tonight's 7:30, and I just want to get your take on that.
I watched it before I came here tonight, and I agree very much with Eddie. But one of the problems we have is one is black, one is white. We have on my right the white, we have on my left the black. 2 political parties that have Australia in interest at the end of the day, but they've all got to have the opposite point of view, whether it's right or wrong. And one of the issues that we need is somehow to bring that together, because base right at the bottom of the barrel, their interest is in the well-being of Australia and Australians. And maybe we've got to do something about getting the United Nations involved and all of our neighbours. The issue is, where can we put them initially to say, OK, you need to go through a process, you need to be Australianised. And when they're Australianised, open it up and embrace them and bring them in. We need the population. We need to increase the numbers here. But let's bring them in with some sort of Australian content so that it's easy for them to adjust.
Rachel?
I just have to say that these 2 guys have almost made me cry. I find this whole...
One more.
The whole hand-on-boat drama, I think, is a massive distraction to how big this problem is. And I agree with these 2 gentlemen that we need to depoliticise the issue of refugees. We've got 43 million people displaced right now on this earth, and we have 10 million, genuine refugees. We have got to really have a big discussion as a country of how many refugees we are prepared to take. Maybe it's a limitation. From what cultures are we prepared to welcome? In America, when you apply for refugee status, there's a whole list of who the Americans are kind of favouring as refugees. It might be Coptic Christians, it might be gay Nigerians. We need to have non-political discussion. No, it's gay Nigerians are being murdered in their country. Personally, I'd love them all to come here and start a new life. That's just me. But we need to have that bigger discussion about who we're prepared to take. I am passionate about stopping the boats because seeing children drown absolutely rips my heart off. But we have to, as you said, separate these issues. talk about, okay, how can we humanely process, as the Americans would do, how quickly. In America, if you're not processed in 3 months, you're given a work permit. Then you work. If you miss your appointment with your officer, you're then basically put on a list to get out of the country. If you're processed and found not to be a refugee, you are removed from the country very quickly. They've actually found a fairly humane way to do it. Of course, there has to be processing centres. People need to be immunised. People are arriving with live measles, and there is a degree. I know that young people laugh when you talk about being Australianised, but I work with an organisation, Hagar, who work with some of the most horrific human rights abuses, children taken from pedophile rings, women who have been horribly burned and kept in domestic servitude. They would have to go through a process of trauma counselling. Refugees need a lot of resources to truly integrate. You can't take highly traumatised, genuine refugees and just throw them in the community. We really have to have a grown-up discussion. How many are we prepared to take? What money are we prepared to put there? And not expect them just to kind of sink or swim. Otherwise, we will have key pockets, suburbs where we have young, traumatised children growing into adolescence who will not be able to join our nation in a productive and successful manner.
Can I just say one?
Have to be brief, because we've got to move on.
I think one point, briefly, Tony, is that generosity must lead us to increasing our humanitarian intake. It was higher under Labor, but we really need to see it dramatically grow from where it is now, and I think that's a very important part of this debate.
Okay, brief comment.
Well, I would say that Rachel's right to say we need a process, and she's right to say we need to resettle people properly here in Australia. That's absolutely right. That's what we do. We take it very seriously. In fact, we are one of the...
Well, unless you're on Manus Island,
No, we're one of the most generous nations. One of the most generous nations in the world when it comes to resettling refugees according to the UNHCR refugee resettlement program. And I think that's a good thing. We're either the first, second or third, and it all bounces around that. In fact, we have increased the humanitarian intake. We have.
Okay,
No,
I'm going to leave it there.
Increased.
Sorry, we're actually going to change the subject because we've got quite a few things to get through. This is Q&A. It's live from the Melbourne Recital Centre. We're going to change tack now. Our next question comes from Mary Ann Wilson.
Thank you, Tony. Tanya Heard expressed her views of how her husband, James, was treated in the Essendon drugs saga. James may be held accountable for his wife's comments by certain people calling for the end of his employment with the Essendon Football Club. Is it reasonable to hold James Heard answerable for the views expressed by his wife?
Eddie Maguire.
Well, this is a really vexed question because, and it cuts to the nub of it, it's a good question for Mary, because you have a situation in football where probably the most heinous crime you can have in a football club is going against the club, and particularly on the eve or when you're about to go and play a big game, as with the situation. I commend in so many ways Tanya Heard's comments because she's standing there and there's nothing like it, and people don't realise it until they're in that firestorm when the whole world is coming down on top of you. However, I believe that whoever was advising was giving them the wrong advice, because they went on the 7:30 report, and that might have been okay in a political sphere, but in a lot of ways it showed a naivety to the football world, and that's the world that James has to live in. And unfortunately, he has defied his club, who have told him on numerous occasions to please let it pass.
Well, but hang on, go back to the question, though. I mean, the question was, can you hold him responsible for what his wife said? Because she was the one who talked on the 7:30.
The answer is yes. But, and that's the situation. Now, the Essendon Football Club...
I am going to say so many bad things tonight if you're going to hold my husband responsible.
The situation, though, is that Essendon have got a board meeting on Wednesday where they'll make a decision. So they've gone from having Paul Little give a 2-year extension to having a real think about it. I really sincerely hope that they sit down and they work it out and we go forward, to use the term of the millennium. But that James can come back into the football family, because he's a bit, in a lot of ways, his history, like Lindsay said before, you can't just...
Haven't you said they should cut him loose?
No, I was asked a question on if somebody defied you 4 or 5 times as president, do you cut that person loose? And my answer was yes. You know, that you have a hierarchy in these things, and particularly if you're the coach of the football club. And if Essendon's President Paul Little has said, please, this is our tactic going forward, this is what we've agreed to, let's get on with it, then you can't be rewinding all the time. And it was just unfortunate. It was on the eve of the football where Dustin Fletcher was about to break the club record. There's so many big things to celebrate. And the Bombers, who've gone through hell in the last 12 months, were about to take the step forward into the next period of their history, and it was in rewind. The people, though, you've got to take into account the people. The Herds have copped an amazing belting. We feel for them, but football wants this to now go to the next stage, and we'll find out on Wednesday whether or not Essendon are prepared to do so.
You're a big football fan.
A few pounds ago, silence is golden. Herd has elected to do what he needs to do, got out of town. I think it's tremendous that a family member supports another family member. But this was the time that one should have stayed silent. By opening Pandora's box, it's adding fuel to the fire. And the media have a frenzy when somebody keeps on throwing chairs under the fire. And this was a perfect example of it. He was out of town. She was doing the right thing mentally by defending her husband. But that doesn't help him or the Essendon Football Club. And at the end of the day, they're the 2 key players in this game.
OK, we've got a few questions related to footy. This one's from Samantha Lilly.
Good evening to the panel. My question is directed to you, Eddie. The incidents of Mad Monday last year, where a man with dwarfism was set alight, has indicated that there is a gap in the inclusion and understanding of the AFL and the media alike. The response from Mr Demetrio was deplorable and deeply offensive. He thought it was a joke. As a short-statured woman myself, this was hurtful and incredibly insensitive. Setting a man on fire, regardless of his size, is not a joke. How is the AFL and you, Eddie, going to demonstrate leadership to develop a fully inclusive and tolerant culture within the AFL that is so desperately needed?
Yes, look, Samantha, it was inexcusable. So that's the first thing. Just tick that off. In defence of Andrew, he thought when he was told of the incident that it was a joke, that somebody was playing on him on the set of Talking Footy. So he didn't think that it was a joke that was a practical joke and he was laughing along with it. He thought somebody was trying to rev him up 10 seconds before he was going on air. So he took that as a misunderstanding. I'm just telling what happened there. So it wasn't that he was laughing at what happened. He thought it was a joke in that somebody was trying to rev him up beforehand. He was incredulous. He couldn't believe that this would happen, nor could anybody else. And you're right. And, people throughout society, I think the great thing about football is it is a microcosm of society in so many ways. The good, the bad, the indifferent, the stupidity, the muck-ups, all these things. I mean, the Herd saga, what you brought up, all these different things happen. It's how we react to them. And I don't think you'll ever see anything like that ever happen again. I think the Mad Monday culture is well and truly gone. I think that was something that came out of nowhere. The incident was a send-up of their coach at that stage, and it was in bad taste. And the actor went along, and then he was set fire to, and it was obviously humiliating to him. So you're right. But these are things that we have to look at in the community and say, right, OK, let's work it through. These are knuckleheads at times. These are smart people at times. There's been so much that the football community has led the way in, and we're very proud of that. But we are a community that's evolving all the time, otherwise we'd be out of business on this show. There'd be nothing to talk about. But to your point, yeah, it is. It would be deeply hurting, and anybody in football who has any sensitivity, and that's most of the people, would apologise from the bottom of their hearts for anything that came out of that. And did come out of that. So, as I said, to your point, I think people have learnt from that. I don't think there's any Mad Mondays anymore. And I think there is... an evolving... Well, the Geelong have one, but they get dressed up and it's a bit of fancy dress and all the rest of it. This one got out of hand, and it's as simple as that. You know, somebody with a smart idea and too much grog on board, it happens. And
go back to our question. Samantha wants to get back involved.
You've actually missed the final part of my sentence. What are you going to do? What leadership are you going to show?
Me personally?
Yep.
Well, we don't have Mad Mondays at Collingwood anymore.
I'm talking about you as a figurehead in the AFL, media, community and the like.
Well, not being silly, give me a head start. What would you like me to do? What is it that we need to do?
I think the AFL needs to better the discrimination.
Yeah, look, I think that the AFL...
And if it's the CEO that can't even demonstrate this, then what hope do we
I think you're being harsh on Andrew Demetriou there. He's a guy of great character and deep feelings. He can rub people up the wrong way. No, I don't think the Herds would be agreeing with that.
He's a repeat offender. It's happened before.
Well, geez, I've watched him for the last decade take racial vilification, women's rights, so many areas in football to a higher level where it's led the community. You know, AFL football has been ahead of the curve on all these things. And
I just want to hear from the other panellists on this. Sorry about that.
I think that's a bit harsh on Andrew.
Rachel.
Well, actually, I would like you to finish that sentence because I was just about to speak to it, but you'll do it better than me. Just in terms of how has because it's easy as a woman to sometimes feel that you're watching the footy show, you're like, oh, this is not, they're not talking about something that really is speaking to me. There still are remnants of the culture that seem anti-female and can seem racist, though that is being cleaned up.
I'll only say this, Rachel, in that when I hosted the footy show in its initial incarnation, the idea was actually to open the locker room doors and let women come in. In those days, I mean, it's not that long ago that you couldn't go into the members at the MCG, you couldn't go in at the VRC. You had segregation in every pub. You had to go to the ladies' lounge for a drink and things like that. Believe it or not, the first person who stopped that at a football club and invited the women in, if you like, was John Elliott, which a lot of people may not realise. There you go. Not sure of his motives, but
But I love how the AFL is inclusive of community. Having lived in America where NFL teams are owned by billionaires, having lived in Britain where the soccer teams are owned by billionaires, I love that it does keep looking back to its community.
The secret of the success of AFL football is women. 50% of the membership is women. The reason why the footy show in Melbourne used to rate twice as much as the one in Sydney was because women watched it. It had more grocery buys than any other show on television.
Do you know women want those smaller shorts back?
Yes, well, I disagree. See, I disagree because I think women, particularly in the AFL, particularly in the AFL states, understand the tactics.
All right.
They understand the feeling of the game. And to be perfectly honest, the reason why there's no fights at the footy, as much as you've seen other codes, is the amount of women who are there and the facilities there as a result of it. And it's women who keep the game going. It's as simple as that.
Let's quickly hear from the other panellists. Lindsay, you've been listening to this. Do you think the AFL has something to answer for? Or do you think Andrew Demetriou has something to answer for?
Well, I know Andrew very well, and Andrew wouldn't go along with the conflict that we've heard today. He would be horrified at it, and I couldn't believe anybody, whether they're involved in football or outside of football, could go along with any of the acts that were mentioned and applaud them. I'd be horrified if I honestly felt that was the case.
Just got a hand up down there. We'll quickly get a microphone to you. And Richard, you're a big footy fan as well. I mean, this can't have been, well, it wasn't one of the great moments, was it?
Well, look, this is a circumstance which is obviously deplorable and it should be condemned. I would say, I think the AFL has done a lot in terms of inclusiveness. I think if you look at any organisations in Australia around Indigenous affairs, any organisations, including companies, the state-of-the-art best practice in Australia today is unquestionably, in my mind, excuse me, the AFL. But the other point I wanted to pick up on was what Rachel said. The footy really matters to this state, to this country. I come from Geelong. I represent Geelong, like Rachel very much. And it really matters.
Don't you have two dogs called Gary and Ablett?
It is true. I do. My miniature poodles, something which when I was in the union movement I didn't talk much about having miniature poodles, but Yes, they are called Gary and Ablett, but...
Sorry, I'm going to ask,
hang on a second. You're a member of the ALP, you've got a poodle?
Yeah. Well, and can I say that...
can I just ask you quickly, have you sent them to the Gold Coast with the real thing?
I'm going to put that on all the trucks tomorrow.
It is true that when Gary Ablett moved to the Gold Coast, that was an existential moment for both Gary and Ablett. But I'm told you can't change a dog's name, so they're both named after Senior now. And that's the way we've got around.
Okay, I've got one last question we've got to go to before we finish, and it's from Adam Tyre.
This is a question for Rachel, and it's on the whole debate about bicycles and the dooring that's been happening around Melbourne. There's been an increase of these accidents, and more often than none, the bicyclists are actually the ones that cry wolf. And there's been times where, as a pedestrian, I've almost been run over because bicycles still fail to follow road regulations, especially around red lights. Has it gotten to the stage where we need, say, designated bicycle lanes, like roads for bicycles, or should everyone that wants to ride a bike on a road just get a bicycle driver's licence?
Rachel, you're a cyclist. Time to defend the tribe.
No, I think this is a very timely debate to have, and I think as we are trying to get more cars off the road and more people from being obese, these incidents are going to come up more. I have a friend who has 4 friends currently in St Vincent's Hospital from being deliberately mowed down in Sydney. There's I think, father in Melbourne in critical care who also appeared to be deliberately mowed down. I think there's a lot of strategies that
I think we're going to
be...
say allegedly.
Okay, allegedly mowed down. I've spoken a lot to cyclists, and they feel that often they are the victim of a deliberate act of aggression, often by a male driver who is making an assault with a deadly weapon. I think the charge, if it can be proved, should be, if not attempted murder, it should be assault with a deadly weapon. Because if you deliberately hit a cyclist with a moving vehicle, it really is like shooting a bunny in a cage. I mean, I don't know how people are getting off on it. On the other hand, there are areas in Melbourne where cyclists and pedestrians are coming into danger with each other, and the pedestrians can be very, very badly hurt. I know Centennial Park in Sydney is an area there's confusion. The cyclists think that cycle lane allows them to go 60 k's, but there's a children's park here and the mums park there. I think infrastructure really needs to be looked at by councils. Hey guys, we pay you a lot of money, sort that out, please. I think apparently a lot of younger cyclists aren't really clear about the road rules, or they think this lane really is me, me, me. Actually, it means kind of safe place, but it's not actually yours. And I think there needs to be a higher level of education for drivers. I felt very compassionate for that man in Brighton, and I don't say that lightly because I very rarely have compassion for men in Brighton. But I think he, like a kind of a dog, his hair's up, he felt under attack. I think had she been obviously hurt on the pavement, he would have had a different response.
This is a young woman on the bicycle who filmed the incident.
And I think she obviously had a trauma. I can hear trauma in people's voice. I think she's probably had other doorings or other near misses that's left her hypervigilant. So you had a kind of hurt person attacking man whose hairs went up and behaved badly. Did I act that out? But I think we really need to get on top of this issue. I think cyclists should feel safe on the roads. We want more of them. Pedestrians should feel safe crossing on a light and not have a cyclist go through, particularly lanes when you're parking the car and you don't have the child locks in the car and the children open the doors onto a bike path, which happens in Melbourne all the time. And I've not almost lost one of my children, but very close to losing a limb on one of those. I guess I was at fault. I don't know how I could have grabbed that child and saved them.
Rachel, we're running out of time. I've got to go to Lindsay here as the truck magnate. How about putting on the back of the trucks you're passing another cyclist?
They go too bloody fast, you can't. I honestly believe what they've done along the Yarra River, where there are specialist cyclist tracks. We have bicycles running along St Kilda Road in the main traffic lane and it is detrimental to both the motorist and the cyclist. We cannot mix the two together. It is an accident waiting of some proportion to happen. I've found myself on numerous occasions where bike riders have just gone straight in front of us. And if I wasn't conscious through looking at my rear view mirror, as I do, which most truckies do all the time, you'll run them over time and time again. The aspect of opening a door, they're going to run into it time and time again. If you take St Kilda Road between Toorak Road and Malvern Road, as you're going towards St Kilda, you will find every night bike riders as though they're in a race. And they're going like hell. They don't really care too much. They've even put their own safety at risk. If the councils and the government want to do something about well-being and cyclists, create their own tracks. Put the tracks down the centre on the lawns, where the trees are, between the tram track and where the cars are parked on the left or right-hand side of the road. Do something that's constructive, not to put them together.
Eddie, hot breakfast, the hot topic, cyclists. What are you going to be saying?
Well, we've had the debate all week, Tony, and I think it's a mixture of the both. You know, it's not like it's people just riding with the old basket on the pack rack anymore. There are people going down like they're in the Tour de France, and we have to. And they race along, and you know you can look in your rear vision mirror, but geez, I tell you what, a bike at going flat out will get to you before you even know what's going on. We have to put in the infrastructure. It's as simple as that. Yeah. Once upon a time, people maybe rode their bike around a place. Now there's thousands of them. So we have to work it out. And it's a bit like what we've been talking about all night. Let's plan for what's happening, not what we wished was happening. Do what's actually need to be done. We need to have bike lanes. We probably need to have designated streets in the city in particular, and the ins and the outs of the city, which are for bikes and others that aren't for bikes, so that you know, at least if you're driving down one street and this is one that's got a big bike lane in there, that you're awake up to it. It's not that hard. I think we just need to be a little bit compromised in the whole situation. The problem is, though, everyone thinks they've got the sense of entitlement. I'm a bike rider, I deserve to be on the road, I don't need to pay registration. I'm a car driver, get off the road, you should be paying registration. Whack, whack, whack. It's like Lindsay's black and white. Everyone's arguing. You've just got to keep it nice and easy, because I can tell you, Tony, when you bring black and white together, it is magnificent.
Okay. On that, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Eddie, on that green note, it's time for us to say goodnight. Please thank our panel. Eddie Maguire, Kelly O'Dwyer, Lindsay Fox, Rachel Griffiths, Richard Mars.